Call the police. That woman is destroying our property values. That's what HOA President Victoria Hale screamed before dialing. 911 and my wife for the so-called crime of planting wildflowers in her own front yard. It was 7 a.m. on a Tuesday. My wife Patricia was kneeling in the dirt, her hands buried in rich Colorado soil that smelled like morning rain and fresh beginnings. She wore her oldest gardening jeans, hair slipping free from a messy ponytail. Across the street, Brenda stood. On her chemically perfect lawn, dressed in full makeup and crisp khakis, her manicured fingers stabbing the air like a conductor leading an orchestra of outrage. Moments later, a squad car rolled up, then officer stepped out, took 3 steps toward the dangerous criminal, tending her flowers, then froze. His jaw dropped. "Your Honor, Judge Blackwood?" Brenda's clipboard slipped from her hands, clattering on the sidewalk. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "Oh, did I forget to mention? My wife happens to sentence criminals for a living. So let me ask you, what would you do if your own HOA Karen called the cops on you for gardening? Share your nightmare story in the comments. Where are you watching from? And does your neighborhood have one of those people? But before we get ahead of ourselves, let me rewind and explain how we got here. My name's Daniel Lane. I'm 60 years old. Retired after 34 years with the Colorado Springs Fire Department, 3 decades of running into burning buildings while everyone else ran out. My wife Patricia has served as a municipal court judge for 17 years. She's the kind of judge who handles drunk drivers, petty disputes, and still manages to balance compassion with a backbone of steel. 3 years ago, we moved to Willowbrook Estates for the peaceful retirement we'd earned. You know, the kind of neighborhood streets curved like rivers, each one named after the trees cut down to build it. Identical beige houses, a mix of retirees like us, and young families whose kids draw chalk art on sidewalks, art that somehow offends certain people. Our place is a modest ranch, nothing fancy. Patricia loved it because of the big front yard. After years of dreaming, she finally had space for a real garden. She'd only ever managed a few potted plants on our apartment balcony before. Then came Victoria Hale, 62 years old. She lives in the biggest house on Maple Ridge Drive, the one with pointless columns built only to scream important people live here. A former real estate agent, Brenda, treats her HOA presidency like she's running a dictatorship. She's the kind of woman who irons her jeans and color codes her gardening tools. For 2 years, things were fine. We paid our dues, kept the grass, trimmed to regulation height, avoided parking RVs in the driveway. Patricia waved at neighbors on her morning jogs. I helped jump car batteries when the winter cold killed them. Just normal suburban life. But this spring, Patricia decided to replace our dying Kentucky bluegrass with native Colorado wildflowers, columbine, Indian paintbrush, blanket flowers, plants that actually belong here instead of thirsty grass in a semi-arid climate. She spent weekends on her knees in the soil, breathing in lavender, while velvet soft earth passed through her fingers. That's when Brenda made her move. I was sipping my morning coffee when I heard the sharp click, click, click of heels on the sidewalk. It was 7:30 a.m. Brenda was marching toward us like she had a warrant to serve slacks pressed. Perfume thick enough to choke a horse. "This landscaping violates community standards," she snapped, waving a paper from what looked like a 22-year-old printer. "I'm issuing a $400 fine for non-conforming vegetation." Patricia rose slowly, brushed soil from her knees, and in her calm judge's voice asked, "Which covenant does this violate?" Brenda's nostrils flared. Section 12.44. It clearly says all landscaping must meet aesthetic standards. Actually, Patricia replied, steady as sunshine. Section 12.44 only restricts dead or dying vegetation. These are healthy, native plants. Brenda stiffened. I know what I meant when we wrote those rules, and that's when we realized this wasn't an honest mistake. Patricia had done her homework, reading every single page of the HOA covenants. With the same attention she gives to complex legal briefs, the rules only mentioned removing dead plants, keeping grass at reasonable height, and avoiding unsightly debris. Nothing about plant types, nothing about aesthetic standards, nothing that made a wildflower garden illegal. But Brenda wasn't finished. Over the next week, we discovered 3 other families had been targeted. George Atwood, a 74-year-old Vietnam veteran, was fined $250 for growing tomatoes in the spot where his late wife once kept roses. Brenda claimed vegetables were inappropriate for front yards. Emily Foster, a single mom working 2 jobs, was forced to pay $400 to erase her own child's chalk art because Brenda declared it unsightly markings. There was a pattern. Brenda went after the elderly, the struggling, or anyone who dared. To be different from her perfect suburban vision, that morning, Patricia set down her coffee mug with the quiet determination that rattles even seasoned attorneys in her courtroom. "We're not paying this fine," she said. 2 days later, Brenda escalated. A certified letter arrived, the return address embossed because of course it was. Inside, the fine had doubled to $1,500. The letter claimed an emergency board meeting had voted unanimously to impose enhanced penalties. 10 days to pay or face a lien on our property. But there was one problem. Patricia called every HOA board member that afternoon. "Emergency meeting?" croaked Frank over speakerphone. "I was in Denver all week with my grandson." 2 other board members said the same thing. They hadn't been notified, never voted, never even seen the so-called meeting minutes. Turns out Brenda's unanimous vote consisted of just 3 people: herself, her neighbor Marion Cole, and Marion Cole's husband Howard Cole, who usually naps through every HOA meeting. What Brenda didn't count on was Patricia's memory. At a dull legal seminar years ago, Patricia had learned HOA fines in Colorado require a written notice sent 14 days in advance, plus a hearing where homeowners can defend themselves. Brenda had done neither, which meant her fines were about as binding as a grocery list. Patricia filed a formal complaint with the Colorado HOA Oversight Division. And here's where it got interesting, because if there's one thing Brenda hates, it's losing control. That's when her surveillance campaign began. Every morning at 6 a.m., Brenda's white Lexus prowled our street like a shark circling prey. The sour exhaust mixed with morning dew as she parked across from our house. Engine humming, air conditioner blasting, click. A photo of a single brown blade of grass, click. A hose coiled on the ground instead of hung neatly, click, click, click. Yesterday's newspaper still in the driveway at 6:15 a.m., the slam of her car door became our neighborhood alarm clock. Frank even timed his walks to match her inspections, just to wave cheerfully and call, "Morning, Brenda. Getting your exercise?" Watching her scurry back to her Lexus never got old. But while Brenda obsessed over her evidence, Patricia was quietly building something much more dangerous. She started gathering stories. On her evening jogs, she knocked on doors. At the grocery store, she chatted with neighbors. She made mental notes whenever someone mentioned trouble with the HOA. The picture that came together was darker than we had imagined. Frank's tomato plants weren't his first crime. Brenda had once fined him $150 for simply displaying his Purple Heart license plate holder, claiming it wasn't an approved decoration. She only backed down when Frank's veteran friend started asking tough questions about whether the HOA supported the troops. Then came Emily Foster's sidewalk chalk drawings. That was violation number 3. Before that, she was warned for letting her kids' bicycles sit in their own driveway, then fined $150 because her 6-year-old left a soccer ball on the lawn overnight. Each time, Sarah quietly paid the fines. A single mother working 2 jobs doesn't have the time or energy for legal battles. And there was the elderly widow on Pine Street, cited for excessive bird feeding after Brenda claimed her little bird bath attracted pests. Translation: Brenda didn't like the sound of songbirds during her backyard phone calls. Every target had one thing in common. They were either vulnerable, different, or simply unwilling to bow before Brenda's suburban throne. Then came the discovery that changed everything. While reviewing records, Patricia noticed something strange. She compared the dates of Brenda's fines with HOA board meeting minutes from the last 2 years. The result was chilling. Every single fine had been issued during weeks when at least 3 board members were out of town. Brenda wasn't just overstepping her authority, she was planning her harassment for when no one could stop her. Marcus, Patricia told me that evening, her voice low and sharp, the same tone I'd heard when she sentenced career criminals. This isn't just power-hungry behavior, this is calculated. This is intimidation. From that moment, our home became a command center. The smell of fresh coffee and printer ink filled the air as Patricia built her counterattack one document. At a time, every photo Brenda snapped, every notice she issued, every made-up rule was collected by someone who knew evidence better than most lawyers. Patricia was playing chess. Brenda was playing checkers. Brenda had no idea her queen was about to fall. A week after Patricia filed her state complaint, Brenda tried her so-called nuclear option, the architectural review process. The certified letter was thick as a legal brief and twice as arrogant. According to Brenda, our wildflower garden needed landscape modification approval. Her claim? Any change to existing vegetation required advance permission from a 3-member panel. Now, here's the truth about these committees. I knew from my time in the fire department that they're meant to prevent neighbors from painting houses neon pink or installing a 20-foot Elvis statue in the front yard. They're not supposed to control what kind of flowers you plant in soil. That's been the same for 17 years, but Brenda pushed forward anyway. 48 hours notice. Community center basement. Bring all documentation. She even brought an expert witness, some landscaping professional, who would apparently explain why native Colorado plants didn't belong in Colorado soil. Patricia hung up the phone after hearing this, then smiled. Not her friendly smile. Her courtroom smile. The one that makes defense attorneys nervous. She wants a hearing, Patricia said, opening the closet.
Oh.
Let's give her a hearing Thursday night. 6:30 p.m. The community center basement smelled like decades of the 80s of potluck dinners and budget meetings, stale coffee, old carpet, and mildew. Fluorescent lights buzzed like tired insects, casting everything in that lifeless beige that seems designed to drain. The joy out of public buildings. Brenda sat at a folding table with Marion Cole and Howard Cole, trying to look like the CEO of a Fortune 500 company instead of a woman fighting over flowers. She even brought a briefcase. Patricia walked in wearing her full judicial robes, black-pressed, gleaming. Her badge read, "The Honorable Rebecca Lane, Municipal Court Judge." Hair pulled tight, leather briefcase in hand, worth more than most people's monthly mortgage. The psychological impact was immediate. Brenda's posture deflated. Marion Cole fidgeted with her glasses. Howard Cole, who hadn't paid attention in 3 years of HOA meetings, suddenly woke up and whispered, "Is she here to arrest someone?" "Good evening," Patricia began, in her commanding courtroom voice. "I understand we're here to discuss Colorado statutes regarding HOA authority over native plant cultivation." Then she opened her briefcase. Out came a full legal briefcase, citations, precedent, photographs of every flower in our garden with Latin names and ecological studies. Brenda's expert witness turned out to be her real estate business partner, Roger Pembroke, a man who looked like he couldn't tell a weed from a wildflower. Patricia asked him to identify 2 similar native species from a field guide. He froze, stammering nonsense. Then Patricia delivered the real blow. Casually revealed photos of Brenda's own backyard, an ornamental fence taller than regulations allowed, a pond built without approval, a hot tub in violation of setback rules. Brenda's face went pale. "That's decorative." "It's different," she stemmed meanwhile. Patricia's pen scratched across the page, documenting every excuse, every contradiction. She'd spent 17 years listening to people lie under oath, and this was no different. By then, neighbors like Frank and Sarah had arrived, sitting quietly like a jury, watching Brenda's authority unravel in real time. Finally, Brenda tried to shut it down. "This hearing is concluded," she announced, after Patricia asked her to cite the specific covenant requiring architectural review for native plants. But Patricia wasn't finished. "Actually, Mrs. Thornfield, I have just one more question. When exactly did this so-called Architectural Review Committee gain the legal authority to regulate indigenous vegetation?" The silence that followed was deafening, the kind of silence where even buzzing fluorescent lights sound like jet engines. After being dismantled in her own mock hearing, Brenda did what power-hungry leaders often do. She went straight for the neighborhood's wallet. A week later, every household in Willowbrook Estates received an official-looking letter with a red stamp across the top that read, "Emergency Special." Assessment noticed, Brenda claimed that the HOA's mounting legal expenses required every homeowner to pay $5,000 within 30 days. No exceptions, no payment plans, no appeals. And to twist the knife further, the letter accused one selfish neighbor of forcing these costs on the entire community. She was trying to turn our neighbors against us by hitting them where it hurt most, their savings. But Brenda made one critical mistake. She called a mandatory neighborhood meeting to explain this assessment, and she scheduled it in the very same basement where Patricia had recently humiliated her architectural review committee. Sunday, 1 p.m. The room was overflowing packed. Tighter than a subway car at rush hour, retirees clutching Brenda's letter like it was evidence in a trial, young families wedged between folding chairs, toddlers squirming in their laps, sensing the tension. The air smelled of fried chicken and green bean casserole from the church. Potluck held just hours earlier comfort food, doing nothing to ease the nerves. Brenda stood at her folding table in a navy blazer that practically screamed, "Trust me with your money." At her side, Marion Cole, looking uneasy, and Howard Cole, barely awake. She fired up a dusty projector and launched into her speech. "Friends and neighbors," she began, her voice dripping with practiced real estate sincerity. "We face an unprecedented legal crisis caused by one household's ongoing war against community standards." Her first slide flashed onto the wall. Legal defense. Fund $35,000 required. The number hung in the air like a death sentence for people living on fixed incomes. That's when Patricia stood. She'd been sitting quietly in the back row, dressed simply in jeans and a sweater, blending in like any other concerned neighbor. But when she rose to her feet, the room shifted. Her posture, her presence, the quiet authority she carried it commanded attention. "Excuse me, Mrs. Thornfield," Patricia said, her voice calm but cutting through the crowded room. "Before we discuss assessments, could you explain exactly which legal expenses we're covering?" "Well, obviously the costs of defending against your harassment campaign and frivolous complaints." "I see. And which attorney is representing the HOA in this defense?" "We've retained Morrison Burke and Associates for all HOA matters." Patricia nodded, flipping her notepad. "Interesting, because according to a Colorado Open Records Act request I filed last Tuesday, this HOA has paid $47,000 to Thornfield Property Solutions over the last 2 years. Your company, Mrs. Thornfield? $47,000 for what exactly?" The crowd stirred like wind moving through tall grass. Those are legitimate consulting fees," Brenda stammered. "For what services?" Patricia pressed. She raised a folder thick with invoices. "Because according to these, the HOA paid your company $8,000 for landscaping consultation during months when no landscaping work was approved or completed." Frank stood up, voice rough. "She charged me $50 for removing weeds from my memorial rose garden. Guess where that money went?" "Her company," Sarah chimed in next. "My vegetable garden fine, she told me it was going to community beautification. But my check was made out to Thornfield Property Solutions." The basement seemed to drop 10 degrees. People clutched their letters tighter this time. In anger, not fear. Patricia's tone sharpened. "And let's not forget, Mrs. Thornfield has been collecting fines and assessments while the HOA's corporate status has been dissolved. For 18 months due to unpaid state filing fees." The room froze. "What does that mean?" called Mrs. Peterson from Pine Street. Patricia answered clearly, gently. "It means every fine, every fee. Every assessment collected in the past 18 months was deposited into accounts controlled personally by Mrs. Thornfield for an organization that legally doesn't exist." The buzzing lights felt louder. Someone's phone chirped, then fell silent. A toddler loudly announced he needed the potty. At the folding table, Brenda's mouth opened and closed, words failing her. Then Frank riled the question on everyone's mind. "Lady, are you telling us you've been stealing our money?" The room exploded. Voices rose like a shaken soda bottle bursting open. Brenda's protest cracked. Higher than a teenager's? I have worked tirelessly for this community. Every fee collected goes to maintenance and improvements. Then you won't mind showing us the bank statements, Patricia replied calmly. That's when Brenda made her final mistake. She snatched her briefcase, toppled her chair, and stormed toward the basement stairs, muttering about ungrateful neighbors and her attorney. The slam of the door echoed like a judge's gavel. But what? Brenda didn't know what she couldn't know was that Patricia had already spent the past week working with her paralegal friend Jennifer at the courthouse. Together, they dug deep into HOA records, banking documents, state filings. Because Patricia knew something most people don't. Small-time fraud follows predictable patterns. And HOA embezzlement has its own signature brand of arrogance. The smoking gun was sitting in plain sight at the Colorado Secretary of State's office. Annual reports had gone unfiled for 2 straight years, just like a driver's license that isn't renewed. The HOA's corporate status had been automatically dissolved, and yet for 18 months Brenda kept collecting fines, assessments, and consulting fees, funneling them not into official HOA accounts, but into accounts she controlled herself. But here's the thing. The financial fraud was just the appetizer. The real turning point came when Jennifer cross-referenced Brenda's violation notices with housing discrimination records. That's when the truth surfaced. Brenda's targeting wasn't random at all. She had been deliberately going after households that fit certain vulnerable profiles. Elderly residents who might pay fines instead of fighting, single parents too busy to research their rights, families who didn't match her narrow idea of suburban perfection. The pattern was so blatant it looked like a guidebook for discrimination. Frank's Purple Heart license plate holder, Sarah's children's chalk drawings, a widow's bird bath, my wife's native wildflower garden. Every violation wasn't about rules, it was about power. It's carefully chosen targets. People who were different or easy to pressure, and the money. More than $23,000 had vanished into accounts that only Brenda controlled. Money collected from neighbors who trusted their HOA president to be fair, while she was busy inventing rules for an organization that legally didn't even exist anymore. That night, Patricia spread the evidence across our kitchen table like a general preparing for battle. Bank records, corporate filings, violation letters, photographs, timestamps, everything needed to prove systematic fraud, discrimination. We could take this to the district attorney tomorrow, Patricia said, sipping her chamomile tea while reviewing the financials. Brenda would probably end up with a plea deal, pay restitution, maybe probation. But then her voice softened. That doesn't fix Frank's memorial garden. It doesn't erase the fear Sarah felt every time she saw Brenda's car in her driveway. It doesn't heal the damage this woman has done to our neighbors for 2 years. I recognized the look in Patricia's eyes, the same expression I'd seen when she ruled against repeat offenders in her courtroom. To her, justice wasn't just punishment. It was about ending the harm and helping the community heal. So what do you want to do? I asked. She smiled. And it wasn't her polite courtroom smile or her neighborly one. It was the determined smile she saved for moments that mattered most. I want to give Victoria Hale exactly what she's been demanding all along, Patricia said. A community that follows the rules. All of them, including the ones about fraud, embezzlement, and discrimination. The taste of her tea mixed with something sweeter, the smell of justice being carefully planned. Outside our kitchen window, the wildflowers glowed under the streetlight, defiant and alive. Each petal felt like a tiny victory waiting to bloom. Next morning, our kitchen transformed into mission control for what Patricia called Operation Wildflower Justice. By 8 a.m., we had assembled the most unlikely legal team you could imagine around our breakfast table. Patricia sat at the head, her laptop open, 3 legal pads filled with her precise handwriting. Frank brought his military discipline and a manila folder thick as a phone book. Sarah showed up with her smartphone, a portable printer, and a social media skill set sharp enough to rival any marketing firm. The smell of Patricia's famous coffee cake filled the room. Mixing with printer ink and righteous determination, As we mapped out a three-pronged strategy, first priority, Patricia said, laying out the documents like battle plans. We restore the HOA's legal status properly. Frank, you're going to be our new president. Frank nearly spit out his coffee. I just want to grow tomatoes in peace. Patricia smiled. And you will. But first we need someone with integrity to rebuild this association from scratch. Someone who has served his country instead of serving himself. She explained Colorado's restoration process. Any dissolved HOA can be revived by filing articles of incorporation, paying back fees, and holding proper elections with notice to all residents. It's surprisingly simple, which is exactly why Brenda had ignored it. And here's the kicker. According to state law, when an HOA's corporate status dissolves, all covenants requiring membership in that corporation become unenforceable until it's restored, which meant Brenda hadn't just been taking illegal fees. She had been enforcing rules she had no authority to enforce at all. Second priority, Patricia continued, we freeze Brenda's accounts and recover our neighbors' money. This was Sarah's specialty. For months, she'd been quietly building a digital database, cross-referencing violation notices with bank deposit dates. With her background in social media analytics, she tracked every fee, every threat, every comment. She even had 3 years of Nextdoor posts where Brenda complained about certain kinds of people not fitting in. Plus, Ring doorbell footage from 6 different houses showing Brenda snooping around and taking unauthorized photos through Patricia's courthouse network. We'd already connected with a civil attorney who specialized in HOA fraud. And here's the best part. Under Colorado consumer protection laws, homeowners illegally fined could claim triple damages plus attorney fees. Third priority, Patricia said, her voice carrying that firm judicial weight. We make sure this never happens to anyone else. A quick search of business records revealed that Brenda's company, Thornfield Property Solutions, held contracts with 4 other HOAs across Colorado Springs. Frank leaned back in his chair, grin spreading across his face. You're talking about taking down an entire network. I'm talking about following the evidence wherever it leads, Patricia corrected, and making sure homeowners everywhere know their rights. Sarah's eyes lit up. I can build a resource website, step-by-step guides, warning signs of fraud, legal rights. Make it searchable by neighborhood. Could help people statewide. The mood lightened when Frank joked, guess that makes us the Covenant Enforcement Committee. Patricia laughed so hard she nearly spilled her coffee on her legal notes. But the real brilliance of Patricia's plan was the timeline. We weren't rushing. We were letting Brenda keep digging her own hole while we built an airtight case. Every violation she issues from now on adds another count, Patricia explained. Every dollar she demands is more evidence. Every comment is another login. The fire. By noon, we had officially restored Willowbrook Estates HOA with the state. Frank was named interim president until proper elections. Sarah launched a private Facebook group for residents to share evidence securely. And Patricia, she was preparing for the kind of legal showdown that would make Brenda wish she'd never left the real estate business. The taste of victory already lingered. Sweet and satisfying, mixed with coffee cake crumbs and the knowledge that, finally, good people were fighting back. Brenda didn't take losing control lightly. Within just 48 hours of our kitchen war council, she launched what could only be described as a scorched earth campaign. If she was going down, she was determined to drag everyone with her, starting with Patricia's reputation. The first strike came as a formal complaint to the Colorado Commission on Judicial Discipline. 3 tightly written pages accused Patricia of using her position as a judge to intimidate a volunteer and sway civil disputes in her favor. She accused her of bias, conflict of interest, and my personal favorite, weaponizing the legal system for personal gain. That complaint landed on Patricia's desk Wednesday morning. She read it over lunch and calmly filed it into what she calls her people who don't understand how the legal system works folder. That evening, while tending to her resilient wildflowers, she told me, Marcus, Brenda just made her biggest mistake. She's challenging a sitting judge without even understanding the basics of judicial ethics. But Brenda wasn't done. By Thursday, a private investigator showed up. I was fixing a sprinkler in the front yard when a man in a cheap suit parked across the street and started snapping photos of our house like he was documenting a crime scene. When I waved and walked toward him, he sped off so fast his tires screeched. Later, Sarah's Ring camera caught the same man prowling near Patricia's parking spot at the courthouse. By evening, Frank's veteran network had already identified him, Gary Kellner, bottom feeder pie, who took the kinds of cases real investigators refused to touch. Friday brought something worse: personal attacks. Anonymous flyers began appearing on windshields all over our neighborhood. They showed a grainy photo of Patricia in her judicial robes, stamped with headlines like "Corrupt Judge Among Us" and "Is Your Neighbor Above the Law?" The design looked like it was pulled from a 1980s conspiracy newsletter, complete with dramatic fonts and far too many exclamation marks. But the lowest point came Saturday morning. At the garden center, while I loaded mulch into the truck, I heard a familiar voice. That's the judge's husband. They think they're better than everyone else. Brenda stood 2 aisles away, loudly telling anyone who would listen that Patricia's family was corrupt, dangerous, and ruining property values. She made sure to stand by the checkout line, where the most people could hear her. That afternoon, Patricia received another call, this time from her court administrator. A complaint had been filed claiming she was handling cases that involved our neighborhood, creating conflicts of interest. It was anonymous, but the administrator recognized Brenda's real estate letterhead instantly. Patricia explained to me later, they want me to recuse myself from every HOA case in the entire county. Parking disputes, zoning violations, small claims, everything. It's absurd. Brenda is demanding that I step away from a huge portion of my caseload just because she got caught in systematic fraud. And then came Sunday night, the moment Brenda crossed the line. Patricia's 78-year-old mother was visiting, staying with us for her summer trip. She was watering the wildflowers before dinner when Brenda stormed across the street like she was leading a cavalry charge. "Excuse me," she barked, startling Mom so much she dropped the watering can. "You need to tell your daughter to stop this harassment immediately." My mother-in-law, bless her heart, looked at her and said, "I'm sorry, dear." "Do I know you?" Brenda puffed up. "I'm the HOA president, and your daughter is destroying this community. Sir, mother, you need to control her behavior. Control her behavior." As if Patricia were a misbehaving teenager instead of a respected. Judge Frank, out walking his dog, saw the entire scene. By the time I got outside, Mom was trembling not from fear, but from pure fury at being told to control her accomplished daughter by a woman who had been caught stealing from neighbors. That night, Patricia sat at the kitchen table, reviewing judicial ethics codes, while Mom baked cookies just to calm her nerves. The smell of chocolate chip cookies mixed with Patricia's quiet determination. "She just threatened an elderly woman to get to me," Patricia said softly. "That's not a legal strategy. It's desperation. Desperate people always make the worst decisions." Monday morning, the nuclear option arrived. A federal lawsuit, thick certified letter, hit Patricia's desk like a brick. Thornfield v. Blackwood civil rights violation under color of law. Brenda was suing Patricia in federal court, claiming she had used her judicial authority to intimidate an innocent HOA president. She demanded damages, injunctions, even Patricia's removal from the bench. The lawsuit was legal nonsense wrapped in official-looking formatting, like putting a bow tie on a garbage truck and calling it a limousine. But nonsense or not, federal lawsuits require responses. And responses demand time Patricia should have been spending on real cases. Over dinner, she gestured toward the towering stack of documents. "She's trying to bury me in paperwork, force me to spend thousands on attorneys while she plays the victim." And then Brenda made her biggest mistake. Tuesday afternoon, Patricia called me with a voice tight with controlled fury. "Marcus, get to the courthouse now." When I arrived, I saw Brenda standing in the courthouse lobby, holding a handmade sign. "Corrupt Judge Blackwood. Where is justice?" She had planted herself directly at the security checkpoint, where every lawyer, defendant, and employee had to pass. The entire lobby smelled of disinfectant and quiet tension. But now it carried something else. Second-hand embarrassment, as Everyone tried to ignore the spectacle of a grown woman staging a personal breakdown in public. This judge uses her position to terrorize innocent homeowners. Brenda shouted, "She thinks she's above the law. Where's the accountability?" Court security had called Patricia's chambers, who had called the chief judge. Finally called me, because they couldn't legally remove someone from a public courthouse without cause. Even if that person was humiliating themselves, that's when Detective Ray Kowalski walked through the checkpoint for an unrelated case. He'd appeared before Patricia dozens of times on DUAs, domestic violence charges, drug possession, the everyday work of municipal courts. He knew her as fair, steady, and professional. And he also knew trouble when he saw it, ma'am, Ray said in his firm, professional tone as he approached. "Is there a problem here?" "Yes," Brenda snapped, spinning toward him. "This corrupt judge is persecuting me for doing my job as an HOA president." Ray glanced at her sign, then at the courthouse cameras, capturing everything, then back at her. "And you are Victoria Hale," she declared, "president of Willowbrook Estates, HOA." That woman, she pointed dramatically toward the courtroom doors, was accusing a judge of hearing cases that supposedly served her personal vendetta against community leadership. The thing about courthouse lobbies is they're built for acoustics. Every word Brenda shouted echoed into nearby courtrooms, where attorneys must have wondered if someone had mistakenly piped in a soap opera through the intercom. Detective Ray calmly pulled out his notebook, the same one he used at Real Crime Scenes. "What specific cases has Judge Blackwood heard that involve you personally?" he asked. Brenda hesitated. "Well, I mean, she hasn't heard any yet, but she could. The potential for bias is what matters." Ray's eyebrow lifted. "El day day da da day day. You're protesting a judge for cases she hasn't heard, involving issues that haven't happened." Brenda's face went through an entire rainbow of embarrassment as she realized she had just described her federal lawsuit in a way that made it sound every bit as flimsy as it truly was. But the real twist came when Ray asked for her ID and ran her name as part of what he later called routine verification of a disturbance complainant. Turns out Brenda had 3 unpaid parking tickets on a bench warrant for failing to appear on a speeding violation 6 months earlier. Yes, the very same court system she was railing against had already issued a warrant for her arrest. "The irony was thick enough to slice and serve with coffee, ma'am," Ray said, his voice suddenly formal, the kind of tone that means trouble. "I need you to come with me." Brenda's homemade protest sign slipped from her hand and hit the courthouse floor with a sad cardboard smack. Ray explained her outstanding warrant required immediate resolution, either by posting bond or spending the evening as a guest of the county jail. For once, justice was starting to taste sweet. 3 days later, the final chapter of Brenda's campaign began to write itself. I was power washing our driveway when Patricia's phone rang inside. Through the open kitchen window, I heard her shift from casual to serious in 3 seconds flat. "Yes, this is Judge Blackwood." "What? Are you certain?" "No, officer. I'll be right there." Patricia appeared in the doorway, keys in hand, wearing the expression she saves for moments when someone's about to learn a very painful lesson. "Brenda just called 911, she told me, suppressing a smile. "She's accusing me of destroying community property and demanding my immediate arrest for vandalism." "The property in question? Patricia's wildflower garden the same?" Native Colorado blooms that had started this whole mess months ago. Despite Brenda's desperate attempts at sabotage, the flowers were now thriving. Brenda had convinced herself that, because she was HOA president, the garden technically belonged to the community, and Patricia tending her own plants somehow counted as destruction. The logic was twisted enough to qualify as a philosophy exam. Grabbed my phone. "Frank, get over here. Bring everyone." By the time the squad car rolled up, half the neighborhood was already on our sidewalks and lawns, as if drawn by some invisible signal. Frank stood in the driveway, arms crossed like a retired drill sergeant ready to defend democracy itself. Sarah had her phone camera steady, knowing this was a moment worth capturing. Even Mrs. Peterson from Pine Street had arrived with her walker, unwilling to miss the showdown. The cruiser slowed to a stop. Officer Ray Kowalski stepped out, scanning. The scene like he was walking into a small-town revolution. The air carried the scent of Patricia's lavender mixed with the unmistakable anticipation of justice. Brenda stood rigid on her lawn, folder clutched tight, dressed in a business suit at 9 on a Wednesday morning. She jabbed a finger toward Patricia, as though identifying a criminal. There she is. The woman destroying our community property in defiance of HOA authority. His eyes shifted. First to Patricia kneeling peacefully in her jeans and gardening shirt, dirt on her hands, trowel by her side. Then to Brendash shaking with indignation in her tailored suit. Then to the crowd who stared at Brenda like she'd just announced. War on gravity itself, ma'am, Ray said evenly. Can you explain exactly what crime is happening here? Destruction of property. Violation of HOA covenants. Defiance of lawful authority. Brenda waved her folder as though it contained the Constitution itself. Ray walked over to Patricia, who rose gracefully, brushing dirt from her knees. Honor, he said. The words struck the morning like a gavel. The reaction was electric. Mrs. Peterson gasped. Oh. Sarah's camera never wavered, but her eyes widened. Even Frank straightened with pride. Brenda, on the other hand, froze. Accusing finger dropped. The folder slipped, scattering papers across her pristine lawn like confetti. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came, only strangled squeaks. Your Honor? She stammered. Yes, Patricia replied calmly, extending a dirt-covered hand. Judge Rebecca Lane, Colorado Municipal Court. Ray shook it respectfully. As a colleague he'd known for years, the crowd murmured like distant thunder whispers. After the realization they'd been witnessing a David versus Goliath battle, where David happened to be a judge in gardening. Clothed R.A. turned back to Brenda. His voice was patient, the kind reserved for someone teetering on the edge of reason. Are you officially filing a complaint that a municipal court judge is gardening in her own yard? Brenda's face changed colors like a malfunctioning traffic light. The HOA, my authority. That's when Frank stepped forward, his voice sharp as command fire. Officer, this woman has been stealing money from our neighborhood for 2 years. That was the breaking point. And that was the breaking point. Within 48 hours of her arrest, Brenda had resigned from every HOA position she held, not just in our neighborhood, but in 4 other communities as well. Her federal lawsuit against Patricia was dismissed with prejudiced legal language for, don't ever bring this nonsense back again. And once the story hit the media, the Colorado Attorney General's office moved fast. Turns out, nobody likes headlines about suburban tyrants stealing from retirees especially. In an election year, Brenda eventually pled guilty to theft, fraud, and filing false police reports. The court sentenced her to 3 years of probation, full restitution to every homeowner she wronged, and a lifetime ban from serving on any HOA board in Colorado. The restitution checks were almost as satisfying as watching her walk into the courthouse in handcuffs. Though if you ask Frank, he'll tell you the real victory came 3 months later, when his tomato plants won first prize at the county fair. That October, we finally held our first real HOA election, with proper notice, official ballots. And none of Brenda's old raise your hand while I'm not looking tricks. Frank won the presidency unanimously, though he spent his entire acceptance speech grumbling about how he never wanted the job in the first place. Sarah became our treasurer, mainly because she was the only person under 60 who actually understood spreadsheets. The recovered funds, nearly $34,000 with interest, transformed our neighborhood. We built a thriving community garden where neighbors now grow vegetables, herbs, and flowers that actually belong in Colorado soil. The scent of basil and tomatoes drifts alongside Patricia's wildflowers every summer morning, living reminder that when people work together, communities bloom. Frank even donated part of his military pension to start the Willowbrook Educational Scholarship, helping local kids study law, public service, or agricultural sciences. 3 students have already benefited, including Sarah's daughter, who dreams of becoming a civil rights attorney after watching her mom stand up to injustice. But the crown jewel? Our first annual Wildflower Festival, held exactly 1 year after Brenda's arrest. Patricia's garden was the centerpiece, surrounded by booths from native plant groups, live bluegrass music, children's laughter, and the smell of Frank's legendary military-grade barbecue drifting 3 blocks away. More than anything, we'd restored something Brenda nearly destroyed: the simple joy of neighbors genuinely caring for each other. Kids played in the streets without fear of violation. Notices: elderly residents planted memorial gardens in peace. Families decorated their homes with pride, reflecting their real heritage instead of forced conformity. Patricia's wildflower garden eventually became a state landmark, featured in Colorado Gardening magazine and studied by universities for native plant restoration. The irony: Brenda's attempt to destroy property values actually raised home prices by 15%. As word spread about our inclusive, well-run community, the legal precedent set by her downfall also inspired other neighborhoods to fight back against corrupt HOAs. The state legislature even passed the Thornfield Accountability Act, demanding stronger oversight of HOA boards. Patricia now speaks at judicial conferences across the country, reminding everyone that justice works best when applied fairly. To everyone, just last month, a new neighbor asked Frank how our community earned a reputation for being drama-free and well-managed. Frank smirked over his morning coffee and replied, "Drama-free? We had enough drama to last me through retirement. The difference is we got rid of the person causing it." As for Brenda, she moved to Arizona, where she's already been cited for pool violations and aggressive behavior toward maintenance staff. Some people never change. Here's your takeaway: always demand proof before paying HOA fines. Document everything: photos, timestamps, the works. And remember, discriminatory enforcement can trigger federal investigations. Most importantly, find your own Frankdom person willing to stand up when bullies think a clipboard makes them a king. Now it's your turn. Share your HOA horror stories in the comments. We read every single one and may feature the wildest tales in future episodes. Don't forget to subscribe to HOA Stories and hit that notification bell, because good neighbors will always beat petty tyrants. Next week, we'll bring you the saga of the parking enforcer who tried to ticket the new director of transportation's car. While she was standing right there watching, community justice has never tasted sweeter, well, except maybe for Patricia's wildflower honey. You've been watching HOA Stories, where entitled Karens get a reality check. If this episode gave you either rage or relief, leave your thoughts below. Subscribe so you never miss a single story of suburban justice served.